Houston, Texas, was the home of Sandra and Jim Melgar, who had been married for over 30 years and resided in a peaceful neighborhood on Kelsey Meadows Court. Jim Melgar, originally from Guatemala, had moved to the United States at the age of 3 when his family chose to settle in Houston, where Sandra and her family lived. The couple met in school, with Sandra recalling Jim as funny and charming, always cracking bad jokes and acting silly. After weeks of him asking her out, she finally agreed to go ice skating with him, and they said the rest was history. They married in 1980, with Jim working as a computer programmer and Sandra running a medical billing and coding business. Both were successful but led a low-key lifestyle according to their friends. The couple had one daughter, Elizabeth, who went by Liz, and she described the three of them as incredibly close, saying her parents were best friends and perfectly suited for each other. The three of them were big travelers and enjoyed things like hiking and fishing, but their love of outdoor activities sadly became a distant memory. Sandra suffered a lot physically with various conditions. She had lupus, epilepsy, hypothyroidism, and she had had hip replacements. Liz said she also saw her mother have violent seizures on many occasions, which was terrifying for the whole family. Jim was desperate to help his wife and spent whole days researching her conditions, trying to find treatments and cures. One of Sandra's friends said there were times that she didn't feel safe driving. She was afraid her seizures might come on, so she depended on him for a lot of day-to-day activities. On December 22, 2012, Jim and Sandra were out and about. Not only was Christmas just around the corner, the couple had recently celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary and decided that today was the day to celebrate. They went out for dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant. At around 9:30 p.m., Jim picked up some drink mixes at CVS, and sometime after, the couple arrived home. They made their drinks and snacks and spent some time in the jacuzzi in their bathroom. They talked about what they wanted to do with their future, whether they would sell their home or not, and whether they would hopefully travel one day. Jim was just 5 months away from retirement and was keen to make lots of plans to fill up his time. They also spoke about the following day. Jim's family were coming over for a small party to celebrate their anniversary and catch up before Christmas. Sandra recalled that suddenly the couple's 4 dogs started barking, so Jim got up to go and see what was going on. After about 15 minutes, he still wasn't back, but the dogs seemed quieter, so she decided to get out and start getting ready for bed, heading for the closet next to the bathroom. December 23, 2012, 7 a.m. One of the Melgar's neighbors noticed that the couple's garage door was open, which instantly struck him as odd. It didn't close all day, and no one went in or came out that anyone could see. At about 4:30 p.m., Jim's family arrived at the house for dinner. Herm and Jim's brother knocked on the door, but was met with silence. Jim's black truck was parked in the driveway. As the garage door was still open, he could see Sandra's silver car parked inside. He went through the garage and entered the house that way, unlocking the front door for everyone else. Inside, they called out for Sandra and Jim, but it was painfully quiet. Herman said all the blinds were still closed, the house felt stuffy, and there was a strange heaviness to it. The couple's dogs then started barking, and Herman's daughter turned to her dad and said, "Something doesn't feel right." The family tentatively started making their way through the home, calling out as they went. Suddenly, Herman heard Sandra's muffled voice coming from upstairs. He ran up and through the master bedroom and the bathroom that tagged onto it. Near the jacuzzi was a small walk-in closet. In front of the closet door was a chair which was propped up under the handle. When he moved the chair and opened the door, he saw Sandra lying on the floor inside the closet, her arms and feet bound by 2 scarves. Herman tried for a minute to untie her before running to get scissors because the knots were too tight. He then discovered his brother Jim in another closet tagging on to the master bedroom about 30 feet away from where Sandra was found. He was naked, badly beaten, and had been stabbed many times. Blood covered the walls and furniture. His legs had been tied with a telephone cord and a rope was loosely wrapped around his chest. Just before 5 p.m., authorities were on scene. But just 2 minutes after they arrived, 52-year-old Jim Melgar was pronounced dead. He had more than 50 injuries in total and was covered in defensive wounds on his hands and arms, including 31 knife wounds. His skull had been bludgeoned too. An expert said that his defensive wounds showed he had attempted to fight off his attacker rather than run away. Through tears, Sandra told the paramedic that she last remembered it being about 1 a.m., and after that her mind was totally blank. She said she had no idea that 15 hours had passed, but as she had woken up with soiled underwear, she knew it must have been a significant period of time. As authorities started moving through the home, which was now a major crime scene, they saw that drawers had been pulled open, jewelry boxes had been gone through, and there was a wallet and a purse out and on the bed. Sandra and Jim's daughter, Liz, said there were prescription pills missing and a TV from one of the bedrooms. Despite the state of the home and what she said, nothing was listed as missing or stolen in the police reports. Inside the jacuzzi was a white blouse and a kitchen knife they determined to be the murder weapon. Police also found Jim's loaded gun in the closet where he had been found, and the couple's safe, which was still locked, but had blood on the handle. Sandra said that her head was pounding and her body was aching as if she had had a seizure, a feeling she said she knew all too well. She was checked over, but they found no signs of her head being hit. They couldn't find any significant marks or abrasions to her arms or hands either, something the police found a little odd given how tight the knots were and how long she would have been tied up. She was taken to the hospital for further checks but quickly discharged herself, and after this she was taken to the Harris County Sheriff's Office to answer some questions. It was a very odd scene, and police suspected that something was off about Sandra's version of events. She said she had no idea what happened past getting out of the jacuzzi and couldn't remember a thing. She said she definitely didn't see or hear anything happen to Jim and had no idea that he had been killed. She told police that she had headed into her closet, started applying some lotion, and then completely blacked out, putting it down to either hitting her head or being struck by someone. An unknown amount of time later, she came around and realized she was bound. She called for help and then must have passed out again after having what she thought was an epileptic seizure. She said the reason she felt this was because her body felt the same way it always did after having one. She said the only thing that had been odd about that day was as they were driving home just hours before, a car they didn't recognize looked like it was trailing them. But investigators were still dubious about her story. They couldn't understand how she hadn't seen or heard anything, especially given how violent the scene was and how loud Jim likely would have been. He was fighting off whoever the attacker or attackers were for a while, given his defensive wounds, and this could not have been quiet. They also couldn't fathom why someone would kill Jim, but leave her alive and virtually unscathed with just a few bruises and small scratches. It was such a different scene in both closets. None of the neighbors reported hearing a commotion or the dogs barking either. There was nothing out of the ordinary to them. One neighbor was even outside working in his garage until 1 a.m. and said he didn't hear or see anything suspicious near the house or on the street. No noise, no cars, no dogs, nothing. He was surprised that a home invasion had actually happened right under his nose, especially while feeling he was more of a target. To be honest, if anybody was going to get robbed, it would probably be me because the garage door was wide open. I'm there. It was just me messing with my stuff. If somebody were going to come down and try and rob somebody, they'd be like, "Look at that dude. Let's just go in there, tie him up and take all his stuff," he said. Officers said that there were no signs of a forced entry and the drawers inside looked like they had been neatly pulled out, emptied and placed around, as opposed to someone opening them in a hurry and hunting for valuables. They found it odd that the murder weapon was left at the scene in the jacuzzi, the murder weapon that had come from inside the Melgar's kitchen. They also thought that she could have very easily pulled the chair against the door using a bath mat or a pillowcase. And they noted that neither Jim nor Sandra had any ligature marks, something they would have expected to see. This indicated to them that Jim had been tied up after death as opposed to being restrained before being killed. Despite the fact that things were missing, according to Liz and Sandra, authorities and experts' overall conclusion was that the evidence was inconsistent with a home invasion and the scene had been staged by Sandra. They asked if she would take a voluntary polygraph test, which she declined. She said that she was freezing cold and shaking and was worried that this would work against her. Detectives had made their mind up about what had happened that night, and on December 24th, they called the Harris County District Attorney's Office requesting to file murder charges against Sandra Melgar, but the DA's office declined, saying there was a lack of evidence. Testing from the scene was starting to come back, and it showed there was no blood apart from Jim's present, which was unusual, but an expert said they could not exclude the possibility of someone leaving the home essentially clean. There were male and female DNA profiles discovered on some door handles, dresser drawers, the handle to the safe, and the scarves that had been tied around Sandra. These profiles did not match any members of the Melgar family, but they weren't fully tested to determine who the DNA was linked to. Detectives then received a message from Liz saying she had found a backpack with an Xbox in it in the garage. She said the only explanation for this was someone had bagged it up to steal it and then dropped it or left it on the way out. An unknown female DNA profile came back on this as well. A few days later, someone called in with a tip, saying after thinking about that night long and hard, they had recalled something. They said they had seen a man acting strangely around the neighborhood that night. It turned out that this man was Chad Sullivan, a convicted thief who was just out of prison on assault charges. Although police knocked on his door twice to talk to him and left a card asking him to get in contact, he never responded, never opened the door, and thus he was never questioned. A few weeks later, Sandra said her memory was finally starting to come back in bits and pieces, and she had a flashback to a young Hispanic woman in the closet talking to someone behind her that Sandra couldn't see. But investigators were still not convinced. They carried on building their case against Sandra over the next 18 months, believing that it just didn't add up, didn't make sense, and didn't seem plausible for this to have been a robbery gone wrong. In the summer of 2014, almost 2 years after Jim was killed, Sandra Melgar was indicted on first-degree murder charges. Her defense team argued that there was no physical evidence against her and that everyone was missing a very key part. There was simply no motive at all. They said, this idea that something must have happened and then she went crazy and subjected him to over 50 blunt force and sharp force injuries is just impossible. They maintained that someone or several people broke into the house via the back door to Robert, and Jim ended up dead in the process. They questioned why Sandra was found with none of Jim's blood on her. If the attack had been as violent as it was, surely she would have something on her. But her hands and nails were clean and her nails were unbroken. She also had no injuries aside from some bruising on her upper arms, something they said they would have expected to see a lot more of given the crime. They also pointed out Sandra's various physical ailments and said there was no way she could have physically overpowered him in the first place and gotten away unscathed. And the fact that there was an unknown male and female DNA found in the house that was not fully tested should be enough to create doubt for the jury. And if there was anything that put doubt in the jury's minds that someone else could have done this, they couldn't find Sandra being guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Finally, her defense team pointed out that the lead investigator on the case was later forced to resign after backdating a search warrant in an unrelated murder case. It was purely a badly put together circumstantial case in their eyes. But the prosecutors said her story just didn't make the slightest bit of sense and put forward 2 motives for murder. They said that she had wanted a divorce, but due to them both being Jehovah's Witnesses, she was worried she would be pushed out if she went ahead with this. But Sandra's family and friends said she never made any mention of wanting to separate from her husband. The second motive pointed to the $250,000 life insurance policy that Jim had, which Sandra would have benefited from. They claimed that it was entirely possible that Sandra had tied Jim up before he was stabbed, perhaps positioning it as some sort of sex game, or she stabbed and bludgeoned him before he was tied up. Hence the reason the knots were only loose as they weren't needed to actually restrain him. She then spent time staging the scene, finishing with tying her hands and feet. They said that one of her nails was slightly cloudy, which pointed to a cleanup happening. Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstructionist, testified for the prosecution. She said that, in her experience, the crime scene didn't match that of a home invasion. There were no signs of a forced entry and dresser drawers weren't scattered throughout the bedroom. She also said that the candle on Jim's nightstand was still lit, and this was a sign that there was no struggle near the closet where Jim was killed, as would likely be expected in these type of situations. She agreed with the medical examiner's report that all of Jim's wounds were defensive and noted that his gun was still loaded and untouched, just inches away from his body. She said as it was his wife that was attacking him, he would be keen to disarm her rather than kill her in self-defense. And the chair blocking the door from the outside, the prosecution along with police argued it was entirely possible for her to put a pillowcase under the chair to pull it against the door and shut herself in. This was not something that needed to be done by someone else. In August 2017, a jury spent 8 hours deliberating. On the first day, they were split down the middle in their decisions. But on the second day, they had reached a verdict. Sandra Melgar was found guilty and sentenced to 27 years in prison for the murder of her husband Jim. Liz said an audible gasp went through the entire courtroom as the verdict was read out. Sandra almost passed out and sat sobbing. She said that the thought of her mother killing her father had briefly crossed her mind, but she no longer thought this was possible, and no one in court thought she would have actually been found guilty. Both Jim and Sandra's families support her claims of innocence and believe her story completely. I try to look at the evidence. I try to be unbiased about it, which is difficult because these are my parents. In the end, I still want justice for my dad. I want to know who did this, and it was not my mother. I know that she did not do this. I'm going to continue to fight until we can prove that, Liz said. The prosecution were happy with the result and the sentence given and said, "She told a story that didn't make sense. It didn't add up, and the jury didn't believe it." The jury foreman would later say, a couple of months later, Sandra's team filed an appeal requesting a retrial. This was denied. In 2018, famed defense attorney Kathleen Zellner announced she would be taking the case to help Sandra, believing in her innocence. Kathleen Zellner has helped exonerate 19 people who were wrongfully convicted and garnered major attention from the Netflix series Making a Murderer when she started working with Stephen Avery after he was convicted of the 2005 murder of Teresa Horbuck. Another appeal for Sandra was lodged, but this was denied again, with one of the judges saying, "The evidence is legally sufficient to support every essential element of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt." In late 2022, the Innocence Project of Texas announced that they too would be picking up Sandra's case. She has spoken from prison and tells the same story she always has. It is a really strange, confusing, and sad case, which has been divisive right from the beginning. Many believe that Sandra is a killer who masterminded the whole operation and staged the scene to get away with murder, whereas many others believe she is just as much of a victim. The police decided that it was her from the get-go. They created the narrative, and the killer or killers are still out there. With numerous groups, podcasts, and websites campaigning for her release, and with others fighting to keep her in, it's clear to see just how polarizing this case and conviction has been. Whatever anyone's thoughts are, there are still so many unanswered questions about that night. Is the real killer behind bars, or has someone been wrongfully convicted? Sandra Melgar will be eligible for parole in 2031. If she is not granted parole, her release date is August 2044. She will be 85 years old. Jim Melgar was a kind, hardworking, and thoughtful man with a great sense of humor and a big heart. He is missed dearly by everyone, and with so many questions about what happened still lingering, family and friends say it only becomes harder to find closure when that was already so tough to get in the first place. Nancy Mitchell and her husband Joe managed the beach motor in near Lake Ontario in Hamilton, Ontario. On the evening of October 17, 1990, Joe was flipping through the channels on the motel's television when he stopped on a program called Unsolved Mysteries, a show he had never seen before. A photograph of a woman appeared on the screen, and Joe was shocked to realize he recognized her. He called Nancy over, and without any prompting, she immediately identified the woman as well. Then, a picture of a man appeared, and the Mitchells recognized him too. He was the man staying with the woman they had just seen. According to the program, the couple was wanted by the police. They had checked into the motel under the names Mr. and Mrs. Fred Smith and had been staying in room 12 since September 10th. Despite the fact that the couple rarely left their room, Nancy and Joe were not particularly fond of them. "Personally, I didn't like them. There was something about them," Nancy later told the Baltimore Evening Sun. Joe had difficulty getting them to pay for their room each week, and they were a week behind on their payments. Nancy and Joe called the authorities immediately, and an emergency response team was quickly dispatched to the motel. When they entered room 12, however, no one was there and the room had apparently been abandoned. Witnesses were quickly located who reported seeing the couple getting into a taxi. After contacting local taxi services, authorities located a driver who reported taking the couple to the Red Rose Motel, roughly 6 miles away. The couple was apprehended by authorities at their room there at 3:20 a.m. on October 18th, just hours after Joe and Nancy Mitchell saw them on television during the first broadcast of the episode of Unsolved Mysteries that featured them. They did not know that they had been on the show and said that the timing of their departure from the beach motor inn had been purely coincidental. It may have had something to do with the $140 they owed the motel. The couple was 46-year-old Sandra Kay Beman and 30-year-old Edgar Eugene Kearns. They were wanted by police because Edgar had recently escaped from Allegheny County Jail in Cumberland, Maryland, where he had been one of just 2 maximum security prisoners, and Kay Beman had been a correctional officer. Kay was a former beautician who had worked at the jail since 1980 and worked the midnight to 8 a.m. shift. On August 29, 1990, at 2:27 a.m., Edgar Kearns had entered the office where Correctional Officer Michelle Padribras had been reviewing medical charts. There were 2 other guards on shift with her at the time. One of them had gone out for the shift's nightly snack run at a nearby convenience store, and the other, Kay Beman, was out on patrol making the routine inmate verification. Edgar had a hard object inside of a sock in his hand, and Michelle feared it was a weapon. He told her she would be coming with him, but she was able to run into a nearby employee bathroom and lock the door. She soon heard a series of noises at the door controls that indicated that someone had left the jail. One inmate had not been in his cell at the time because he had been allowed to study for his upcoming GED exam at a counter near where Michelle had been stationed. He knocked on the bathroom door and let Michelle know that he had seen Edgar and his cellmate, James Barnes, leave the prison. He also said that they had taken Kay Beman with them and that James's arm had been around her neck as though she was being taken against her will. Michelle immediately notified the sheriff's office of the escape. While it was initially assumed that Kay Beman had been taken by the 2 escaping prisoners as a hostage, it quickly became obvious that she had actually participated in the escape. Kay called her 21-year-old daughter shortly after the escape, telling her that she was safe and that she was with one of the escaped inmates. The theory would be confirmed on September 2nd, 4 days after the escape, when James Barnes was apprehended in his hometown in West Virginia. He informed authorities that Kay had in fact aided in the escape. She had smuggled hacksaw blades into the facility so that the 2 prisoners could exit their cell by sawing through the bars. But when this did not work, Kay had to let them out of the cell using her keys. James also told authorities that Kay had participated in the escape because she was in a romantic relationship with Edgar Kearns. This would not be the first relationship Kay had with an inmate. By her own admission, she had dated 2 men she met while they were being held at the jail. She had also been set to marry a man she met while he was an inmate just 4 days before the escape. Kay had first met 33-year-old Thomas Bowman while he was being held in the Allegheny County Jail in 1989 on a breaking and entering charge and developed a romantic relationship with him. He was transferred to the Maryland Correctional Institution at Hagerstown that November, but Kay wrote letters to him and visited him there twice a week without fail. They planned to marry on August 25, 1990. Kay obtained a copy of Thomas's birth certificate so they could be issued a marriage license and purchased their wedding bands while Thomas made arrangements for a minister and with the prison for the ceremony. However, Kane never showed up for her wedding. It took some time for Thomas to get a hold of her over the phone, but when he finally did, she told him that she no longer wanted to have anything to do with him. She would claim after her arrest that she had only agreed to marry Thomas out of sympathy. "I love this woman," Thomas would later tell the Baltimore Sun. "This had been the first woman who stuck by me. She met me in jail and stuck with me. I still love her, and that's the worst part about it." According to her friends and family, Kay had been greatly unhappy with her life. While Kay had no criminal record, at least one of her friends was surprised that the chronically unhappy Kay had seized an opportunity to run away and leave everything she had behind. Kay was divorced and lived with her 2 adult children, neither of whom she got along with, in a mobile home. She struggled to stay current on her bills and was resentful of the sheriff's office with which she worked closely. Just before the escape, Kay told a friend that it would not be long before she was free. The friend did not understand what she meant until she heard about the prison break. Authorities in Canada had Kay and Edgar deported, and they were driven from Buffalo, New York back to Maryland. According to the officers who made the drive with them, the couple did appear to genuinely have feelings for one another, and they laughed and giggled for most of the drive. Kay and Edgar appeared in district court on October 30th and were as physically affectionate as they could be. given their restraints, in front of the waiting reporters, kissing several times for the cameras. In an interview with the Cumberland Times-News, Kay claimed that she and Edgar were working to obtain a marriage license and that they were hoping to have a child together. Given the fact that neither of them had any qualms about running away, both Kay and Edgar were denied bail. Following a bail review hearing, Kay was granted bail, but it was set at half a $1 million, which she could not post. Kay was initially held at her former place of employment, but was transferred to another facility to avoid making her former co-workers uncomfortable. James Barnes was sentenced to 8 years for the escape and related charges, which he will not begin serving until after he completes a 50-year prison term in Virginia for rape and kidnapping. Edgar Kearns was sentenced to 6 years of the charges he faced in Allegheny County for writing bad checks and faced similar charges in Virginia, in addition to the charges that stemmed from the escape. He had previously been charged with the attempted murder and kidnapping of his former girlfriend and her daughter, but those charges were dropped when the girlfriend decided not to testify. Kay Beman entered an Alford plea to the charges against her on March 27, 1991, and sentenced to 10 years, with half of that sentence to be suspended. Subsequent hearings of unsolved mysteries state in an update that after they were both released from custody, Kay and Edgar lived together until Kay's death in 2002, but no mention of Edgar is made in her obituary. Kay passed away on January 23, 2002, following a long illness at a hospital in Ocala, Florida, where she had moved a year earlier to live with her sister. 8-year-old Mariah Martinez was the oldest of 3 children. She and her siblings lived with their mother, 27-year-old Amanda Martinez, in Lubbock, Texas. On October 6, 2016, Mariah's brother, 5-year-old Jeremiah, spoke with Child Protective Services while he was at school. He told the social worker that his mother had gotten into an argument with her boyfriend, who had then punched Jeremiah in the nose. Jeremiah also reported that the boyfriend had threatened to kill Jeremiah and his entire family by driving them into a pond. CPS was further concerned when Jeremiah told them that his family had been living with his 45-year-old maternal grandfather, who was a registered sex offender with a 2002 conviction for aggravated sexual assault. On October 17th, the school contacted CPS again because both Mariah and Jeremiah had not been in school in a week. That same day, their mother, Amanda, was given a drug test and tested for methamphetamine. The Texas Department of Family and Protective Services obtained a court order removing Mariah, Jeremiah, and their 2-year-old sister, Leah Maya, from their parents' custody and placing them in the custody of the state. However, when officials from CPS went to enforce the order and collect the children at their home, they and their mother Amanda were gone. Law enforcement was notified and missing persons reports were filled out on the 3 children. Amanda Martinez was located and arrested on November 1st. She told authorities that her children were with an uncle in New Mexico, but investigators who followed up on the statement found that they were not. Amanda was released. On November 30th, the state of Texas issued a capious calling for the arrest of both Amanda and her mother, 44-year-old Deanna Martinez, each on a charge of interference with child custody, a state felony. Investigators believed that Deanna, who had her own history with CPS stemming from a 2006 investigation, helped take and hide the children in violation of their court-approved custody orders. She was arrested in Albuquerque, where she lived, and transferred to the Lubbock County Detention Center on December 30th. Amanda Martinez would remain free for a few more weeks. On January 17, 2017, police received a report that Amanda had returned to Lubbock and had dropped off her children at the home of one of her relatives in the 8900 block of University Avenue. Officers arrived on the scene and placed Amanda under arrest for the interference with child custody charge. Both Jeremiah and Leah Maya were found in the home, but Mariah was not there. Amanda refused to tell authorities where Mariah was, what had happened to her, or why she was no longer with her brother and sister. In April, Amanda pleaded no contest to the felony charge and was prohibited from having contact her children for 3 years. She further was subjected to a curfew, had to perform 120 hours of community service, could not patronize any establishment that sold alcohol, agree to DNA testing, and attend substance abuse treatment. Since Mariah's mother would not help locate her, authorities turned to the community for help. On March 23, 2018, Mariah's case was featured in a segment on the A&E show Live PD. The segment featured Angeline Hartman from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Pictures of Mariah and the details surrounding her disappearance were featured, and while Mariah went missing from Texas, viewers were advised that her family also had ties in New Mexico. It would be this connection to New Mexico that would ultimately help find Mariah. After seeing Mariah's story on the show, a viewer who recognized her called in a tip, reporting a sighting of her in Albuquerque. The New Mexico State Police began following up on the information provided for the person who called in the tip, conducting several interviews and surveillance as a part of their investigation. On Monday night, March 26th, just 3 days after her story was featured on television, Mariah was located at an apartment in Albuquerque. It appeared she had been taken care of during the time she was missing. The now 9-year-old was placed in the care of the New Mexico Children, Youth and Families Department. The apartment where Mariah was found belonged to members of her extended family. They were aware that Mariah had been reported missing but opted not to report her whereabouts to authorities. The New Mexico State Police did not charge them with any offense to interference with the custody order in place in Texas. They did perform a follow-up investigation that did not reveal any signs of abuse or neglect of Mariah while she was with these relatives. The fact that she is in good health is a relief to the people who hear about these stories. New Mexico State Police Lieutenant Elizabeth Armijo said after Mariah was located, "This is the whole point of having segments on these kids and putting faces on the news. There are success stories." Pontypool, Wales, with a population of about 30,000, was home to David and Linda Maggs, who lived together at 11 Lansdowne in Sebastopol. The couple had been together since 1988, though they first met in 1977. After her first marriage ended, Linda raised her 2 children, Carrie and Andrew, on her own. She worked tirelessly to support herself and her children, often juggling up to 3 jobs to make ends meet. David had also been married twice before, and after many years together, the couple decided to marry. In August of 2002, they tied the knot. Andrew and Carrie welcomed David into their family, and the couple appeared ready to start the next chapter of their lives together. 74-year-old Linda led an active social life. She was a member of a dance group and frequently went out with her friends to dance clubs. Linda also cherished her role as a grandmother and enjoyed shopping for clothes with her beloved granddaughter. She took great pride in her home and garden, which often served as the gathering spot for social events. Linda had a deep bond with her 2 children, and they were incredibly close. She was always on hand to help or lend advice whenever needed. Her son Andrew described her as a beautiful, kind lady with a huge heart. Her 71-year-old husband David had worked as an accountant, but would later retire. The pair enjoyed traveling together all over the world, including the United States and Australia. However, there was one thing that was a source of contention for the couple: money. Prior to the marriage, David had wanted Linda to sign a prenuptial agreement, but she didn't. She said as they were married, everything should be shared between the 2 of them. However, once they were married, they had separate bank accounts and even paid for their own food if they went out for a meal, something her daughter Carrie thought was odd. David didn't share her busy social life. On the occasions he would go out with Linda to her dance shows and clubs, he wouldn't engage or participate. Instead, he would stand outside the venue and smoke. In 2009, David had become more and more reclusive, as he had had his driver's license taken away due to having epilepsy. Over the next few years, their marriage continued to decline. They would often argue over money, and neighbors could hear them fighting in the back garden. By March of 2020, their relationship had completely broken down. When coronavirus hit and lockdown orders were issued, David rang his GP and was prescribed sleeping tablets and antidepressants. His sister was concerned for him and said he was failing to look after himself properly. She would often bring him food and check on him. His day-to-day life consisted of playing cards, watching films, and smoking. He had been in ill health for several years, having survived 2 heart attacks and spending 5 months in hospital, as well as suffering from emphysema. Lockdown was also very hard for Linda. Having previously enjoyed a busy and active social life, Not being able to see anyone meant she spent most days upstairs alone. After his heart attack in 2019, he was referred to a counselor. He was given an anxiety and depression score of 12, with anything over 8 being grounds for a referral. In August, he requested that his antidepressants were increased, and after this, he said he was feeling much better. But in September 2020, another argument between the pair would do further damage to their already difficult relationship. David had called his sister one night and said they had been arguing again, and asked her to go to the house. She said when she got there, it was clear that Linda was very stressed. The argument had once again been about money. Linda had shouted, "It's over, it's done," and David had replied, "Just go," before going back into the house. 3 days later, Linda apologized to David's sister for the argument. On September 16, 2020, Linda decided to start divorce proceedings and officially end her marriage to David, citing unreasonable behavior. After consulting a lawyer, she was advised not to leave the home, and David would also not move out. So they continued living together, but the pair were living separate lives, with Linda refusing to clean up after him or cook for him. David had the downstairs turned into a bedsit with a lock on his door, and Linda had the upstairs. While she had purchased locks for her doors, she was yet to have them fitted. As they shared a bathroom and kitchen, Linda said she felt as though she was being stalked by him. He would often sit outside the bathroom while she was in the shower and wait for her to come out. An estate agent would go and look at the house and value it. He described David as chain-smoking and visibly shaking. David told the estate agent he would rather hurt his wife than lose anything. The estate agent described Linda as being very timid. When it became clear that the house could be sold as part of the divorce, in November of 2020, David was put in touch with a housing support worker who encouraged him to look into sheltered accommodation and renting as options for if the house sold. He expressed the same sentiment to the housing officer that he had to the estate agent. Linda was not going to get anything, even if it meant she came to harm. He told the support worker that he needed to go to the police, as he had thought about stabbing Linda. The support worker was so concerned that she spoke to her line manager, who advised her to call the police on the non-emergency number and also contact his doctor. The doctor phoned David that day and increased his sleeping pills and antidepressants. After the support worker had contacted them, the police went to the house to speak to the couple. When David's sister answered the door, she said she was in shock. She said the police explained that they were concerned for David's mental health, a sentiment she shared, saying he was a wreck and very depressed. David said he was surprised that she had contacted the police, but understood why she had. He said he felt the police didn't listen to him and that their visit wasn't worth it. An officer spoke to Linda, saying there were concerns for her safety. The officer said she was quite flippant and thought it was just his way of trying to get her out of the house, as the house was solely in his name. The officer said Linda declined a domestic violence risk assessment and the option of a safe house, saying that David had never laid a finger on her. The officer told her to avoid arguments with him and keep her phone close to her. No further action was taken. By the new year, the pair were no longer speaking. Financial investigators had been brought on board to look into the couple's finances. This meant that the house would likely be put on the market for sale. On February 5, 2021, Linda was on the phone to her daughter, Carrie. She told Carrie that she was worried about how David would react when he found out their finances were being examined. That same day, David's sister had called him at around 9 p.m. She said he seemed settled and was enjoying watching a film. The February 6, 2021, 9:13 a.m., a disturbing 999 call is made. As officers and other emergency services descended on the scene, body cameras captured the moment they went inside the house. As the officer enters, 2 knives can be seen on the last step of the staircase. David's coldness was apparent. He told the officers, 30 years I've been married to her and she doesn't know how to keep her mouth shut, so I topped her. As the devastating news broke, the community could not believe what had happened. Flowers were left outside the home, and Linda's children were being supported by officers as they faced this horrifying new reality. The truth about what exactly had happened that morning would soon come out. Even though the upstairs was Linda's domain, David had gone up there and taken 2 large red kitchen knives with him, leaving one outside the bedroom door, and he took the other one into her room at around 9 a.m. As Linda lay in bed under the sheets, her estranged husband walked into her room. David told her he wanted to talk about their separation and impending divorce, but she told him that that conversation needed to be left to the lawyers and she wasn't going to discuss it with him. David became enraged. In a frenzied attack, he stabbed her multiple times. Linda, who was 4'10", had suffered an appalling catalog of injuries. She had been stabbed 15 times in the neck, head, stomach, and chest. Her arms and hands had defensive wounds, showing that she had tried to fight him off with everything she had. She had also sustained 2 broken ribs. One stab wound to her chest was 15.5 centimeters. When trying to understand what had led to this, officers learned that David had become consumed with the idea that Linda had been hiding money from him and that she was going to cheat him out of money during the divorce. As was seen in the body cam footage, he told the officers that she had tried to steal 2 houses from him. Investigations were carried out into the couple's finances to see if there was any evidence of Linda hiding money from him or of her trying to dishonestly get more money in the divorce. They found none. But they did find that David had a savings account with £14,000 in there, something he had failed to declare. He admitted to having killed her, but said that he had blacked out and couldn't remember. He told the investigators during his interviews that whilst he had taken the knives upstairs with him, he had only intended to discuss the finances and the divorce. He said he had left one outside the door in case he needed it. He said, "She's only 4'10", but she can be a right madam." The police soon learned about his history of threatening to harm Linda, and soon another witness would come forward with a worrying story to tell. A lady named Pamela had been one of Linda's friends, and then she had become friends with the couple, before a falling out meant she only spoke to David. Pamela had contacted the investigators on the February 18th and explained that just a few weeks before Linda was killed, she had been on the phone with David and asked him how the divorce process was going. She said he replied, "I feel like I could stab her." She said to him that would mean he would go to prison. His response, "I don't care." He was remanded in custody. On the February 8th, he appeared at Newport Crown Court, charged with murder. He entered a plea of guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, adamant that he had blanked out. Judge Michael Fritton would preside over the trial at Cardiff Crown Court, which began on the January 11th, 2022. Judge Fritton told the jury, "It's admitted David Maggs killed Linda Maggs, but there is a dispute about the circumstances in which he killed her. There's a dispute about his mental state on the day he killed her. And there's a dispute about his responsibility for killing her." Defense lawyer Sarah Jones argued that Maggs' mental health and depression would have clouded his judgment that day. Evidence of his past health clearly points to something very, very wrong with his functioning at the time. "I accept it does not excuse what he has done," she said. Psychiatrist Dr. Newen Gillespie told the jury, "In my opinion, the degree of his impairment due to depression is significant. This is a case where there are clear and significant mental health problems. In my opinion, this is a case of diminished responsibility." But there wasn't a clear medical consensus, as another psychiatrist, Dr. Thomas Wynn, said he didn't think David Maggs had depression. The court heard that David felt he had been stung by his 2 previous ex-wives and was adamant that Linda was not going to get any of his money. The prosecution told the jury that Linda was upset, scared, and anxious. She told a friend she didn't know what her husband was capable of. A friend told the court that Linda had explained they had argued when David had changed his will several years prior, cut her out of it completely, and decided to leave everything to his son. The witness said, "About 5 years ago they were arguing about the will. She said she had to pick up an iron to defend herself." The witness also said she had spoken to Linda the night before her death, and they had talked about the divorce, with Linda saying she thought he would lose his temper, but added that he wouldn't hurt her, and in any case, she could call the police. The prosecution said that David had given Linda an allowance of £30 a week and told her, "No sex, no marriage, no nothing," meaning financially, she would be solely reliant on her pension to get by. It was argued that David would become verbally abusive towards Linda and would insult her, calling her thick and stupid. Other key witnesses would address the courts. The estate agent and housing officer who had witnessed David's behavior and heard him make threats towards her life. This painted a very different image from the frail man who was wheelchair-bound and struggled to get in and out of the prison van. David's sister also testified about the argument the couple had had in the garden in September of 2020, saying that Linda had been the one to lose her temper and that she had never seen her brother use threats of violence until that altercation. The prosecution lawyer called Linda's death a vicious and repeated attack. The 999 call and police body cam footage were also shown to the jury, painting a vivid image of the chain of events that had transpired that day. It was also noted that he had only said he had blanked out when he had been reminded that he was under caution, and anything he said could be used in court. After a day and a half of deliberations, the jury had reached their verdict on February 1, 2022. The jury rejected his defense of diminished responsibility, and he was found guilty of the murder of his wife. On March 17, 71-year-old David Maggs was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years that he must serve behind bars. His defense lawyer, Sarah Jones, said that due to his health and age, however long his sentence was, he would likely die in prison. She said he had asked her to tell the court how sorry he was and that he wished it had never happened. When sentencing him, Judge Michael Fritton called David a self-centered, self-interested, bitter and unpleasant man. You would come to resent Linda in a whole variety of ways. You resented her still having a life, a social life, female friends, loving members of family. You resented her having the courage to stick up for herself and start divorce proceedings against you. I don't think you care about anyone other than yourself, he said. During the sentencing hearing, Linda's son, Andrew, gave a victim impact statement. You claim you can't remember anything, but I don't believe you. When you do remember, I hope it torments you as it torments us. On your wedding day, I made a speech and welcomed you into the family. I wish I had never ever said those words. Throughout this whole process, you have not shown a single ounce of remorse, regret, or compassion. That does not surprise me. Mom always said you would never, ever say sorry. Andrew also added that Linda's headstone used her maiden name of Minahan and not her married name of Maggs. For Linda's heartbroken loved ones, being denied the chance to say goodbye was devastating. Having such a kind and devoted woman ripped away from them in the most horrendous of circumstances has left a void that will never be filled. Linda's memory will continue to live on through those who knew and loved her, and she will always be remembered as a devoted mother, grandmother, and friend. On November 3, 1993, 40-year-old Cara Vaughn left her family home in Point Place, a community in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana, sometime between 8 and 9 p.m. She was upset when she left, driving off in her white 1978 Honda Civic. Cara only had about $10 with her and did not take the medication she needed to manage her diabetes. When she failed to return home, her family reported her missing. Authorities spent months trying to locate Cara and her vehicle, interviewing her friends, conducting searches, and entering information about her and her car into investigative databases in the hope that another law enforcement agency might locate the vehicle or make contact with Cara. According to her family, Cara had been troubled and had previously threatened to drive her car into Cane River Lake to disappear without a trace. As a result, Cane River Lake was searched several times shortly after her disappearance. In 2007, the East Baton Rouge Police Sheriff's Office offered to assist in a new search for Cara, using advanced sonar equipment. However, like all previous efforts, this search also failed to locate either Cara or her vehicle. Cara's family continued searching for her in the years that followed, never giving up hope that Cara had run off but would eventually be found. Cara's mother Mildred passed away in January of 2012 without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Cara's sister, Lynn Vaughn, was an anchor for CNN headline news from 1984 until 1998, and then a contributing reporter for CBS 46. After nearly 3 decades of looking for answers about her sister, Lynn prayed to God, asking him to allow her sister's case to be solved before she died. She wanted someone in their family to know what became of Cara within their lifetime. It would not be long after Lynn made this plea that Cara's case would finally be solved. In February of 2021, 20-year-old Ben Abraham, a member of the fishing team at Northwestern State University, went fishing with his friend, Zach Gagnard, a fishing guide on Cane River Lake. Ben had often fished at the location near the 1300 block of Bermuda Road with his father when he was young. Ben and Zach had been using sonar equipment while they fished. They noticed on the screen what they initially thought might be a four-wheeler or a lawnmower submerged under the water. They returned to the spot later and were able to obtain a much clearer image. They feared the object may have been a vehicle. Zach sent the image from his sonar screen and the coordinates where the image was taken to one of his cousins whose father worked for the sheriff's office. A winter storm prevented the sheriff's office from following up on the lead immediately, but dive teams went into the water to investigate on March 12th. It was impossible to see through the murky water, so the divers had to perform a touch search, but they did locate what felt like a vehicle. The Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office had more specialized equipment that would make examining the vehicle possible, and their marine unit and dive team arrived to make another dive on March 15th. They were able to visualize what appeared to be a Honda Civic with all of its windows rolled up. They were able to see inside and saw a skeleton. They broke one of the windows and retrieved 2 identification cards, a social security card and a laminated work ID, which were still in remarkably good condition despite their time underwater. The cards both belonged to Cara Vaughn. Authorities were able to remove the vehicle from the water, and the remains found inside of it were sent to the Louisiana State University Forensic Anthropology and Computer Enhanced Services Laboratory. The laboratory was able to confirm that the remains were those of Cara Vaughn. Cara's sister, Lynn, was of course heartbroken that Cara was no longer alive, but grateful to finally have answers, and relieved that Cara did not appear to have met with foul play. Cara will be buried near her mother in Natchitoches. Taisha Bell was a loving mother of 2 daughters, ages 1.5 and 5. In 2003, 22-year-old Taisha was living in Aurora, Illinois, sharing an apartment with her sister. Late in the evening one night in May of 2003, over Mother's Day weekend, Taisha's sister overheard Taisha receive a phone call and then stepped outside of their shared apartment. Taisha never came back inside. Her family spent a full day trying to get in contact with her, leaving more than 50 messages on her voicemail. Later checks of her cell phone records would show that Taisha had never received any of them, as she had last checked her voicemail the morning prior to her disappearance. Taisha was reported missing to the police. There were no indications that Taisha had planned to be outside for more than a few minutes. Her 2 daughters were left inside with relatives, her television was on, and she had left candles burning in her bedroom. Her purse, identification, and cash were also left inside of the apartment. The day before she went missing, Taisha had gone shopping to buy summer clothes for her younger daughter. Police identified a person of interest early on in their investigation, but no arrest was made. They also conducted several searches but found no evidence that led them to Taisha. After Taisha went missing, her 2 daughters went to live with Taisha's mother, Lorna Smith, who raised her granddaughters to understand that their mother would never have left them willingly. The girls wrote poems and made scrapbooks about Taisha throughout their childhood. Lorna Smith has been instrumental in keeping her daughter's case active with the Aurora police and featured in the media. She drove around with flyers featuring Taisha's picture and information in the window of her car and contacted the Chicago every year, near the anniversary of Taisha's disappearance, to get ongoing coverage of her daughter's case. She also raised $10,000 to offer as a reward for information in the case. Lorna initially feared that her daughter had been killed when she went missing, but she turned to her faith to get her through the years without answers about Taisha and give her some measure of hope. Until I get a knock at my door and police tell me they have found my daughter's remains, I will continue to think of her as alive, Lorna told reporter Denise Crosby in 2013. That day unfortunately came in 2021. On December 11, 2020, human remains, along with some personal items and pieces of clothing, were found in a shallow grave in a wooded area of Kane County, Illinois. The personal items did not provide an immediate identification of the individual. After the scene was processed, the remains were taken to the Kane County morgue to be autopsied and tested further. A forensic odontologist and a forensic anthropologist were brought in to help create profiles that could help the remains. Genetic material from the remains was also sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab to be analyzed, thanks to a DNA profile that was put on file shortly after Taisha went missing. The remains were identified as those of Taisha Bell in early 2021. Aurora police announced the discovery of Taisha's remains and their need for assistance from the public at a press conference on March 16, 2021. While Taisha's disappearance has been solved, the mystery of who took her life still remains. Due to the ongoing investigation into the case, certain details such as the exact location where Taisha's remains were found and the exact cause of her death have not been released to the public. Based on the results of her autopsy, her case has been reclassified as a homicide. Authorities do not yet have enough evidence to make any arrests. Our detectives continue to have working theories in Taisha's case, but we need more information before criminal charges can be authorized, according to Aurora Police Commander Jack Fischel. We implore anyone who may have information to please come forward. Ronnie Latest was a 38-year-old postman from Bruges in Belgium. He was the father of 2 children, a 6-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. In the summer of 1990, Ronnie abruptly disappeared. He was last seen with his car, a Ford Thomas from the 1980s, which also went missing. Ronnie's marriage to his wife Francine was about to end in divorce. While the couple was still legally married, they were separated in practice, with Ronnie spending a few days at a time away from home prior to his disappearance. When he went missing, Francine assumed he had run off with another woman as he had not always been faithful by the end of their marriage. Given how abruptly Ronnie disappeared, his son Christophe assumed that he must have moved to a different country and assumed a new name. There were limitations to the extent of the investigation into his disappearance, as the missing persons unit of the federal police would not be established until 5 years after Ronnie went missing. Furthermore, traffic cameras and automatic number plate recognition technology commonly used in Belgium now were not in place at the time, and sonar boats that could have been used to systematically search local waterways were not available. Ronnie's case would remain unsolved for more than 3 decades until February of 2021, when a hiker noticed what they feared to be the outline of a vehicle in the Dam Savard Canal in Bruges. They notified authorities of their concern. Heavy rains were being forecast for the upcoming weekend, so the water level in the canal had been lowered in order to prevent flooding, allowing the outline of the object divers would later confirm to be a car to become visible. The vehicle was removed from the water and found to be a Ford Taunus from the 1980s, like Ronnie's. The partial number plate still on the front of the car matched the one belonging to Ronnie's car. Several of Ronnie's personal belongings, including his identification documents, were found inside of the vehicle. Human remains, later confirmed to be Ronnie, were also located inside of the vehicle. The investigation into the case will continue, but the local prosecutor's office so far believes, based on current evidence, that Ronnie's death was accidental. Ronnie's children are currently dealing with conflicting emotions following the resolution of their father's case. Ronnie's son, Christophe, told the media after his father's remains were found that while he was relieved to have clarity about why his father disappeared, he now had to process the conflicting feelings of being sad his father was dead, but also feeling happy that he had finally been found. 47-year-old Peter Wilkinson and his wife, 50-year-old Tracy, lived in Starbridge, a town in the English county of the West Midlands. The couple had 2 children, a daughter, Lydia, who was studying biology at Bristol University, and a 13-year-old son, Pierce. Despite being away at university, Lydia and her mother spoke most days and shared a very special bond. Tracy Wilkinson was known for her generosity and compassion. A former British Latin American ballroom dancing champion, she volunteered with the elderly and had the ability to make anyone feel at ease in conversation. Tracy was the type of person who, if she saw a homeless individual on the street, would often go home to gather food for them, never turning a blind eye to those in need. She was a stay-at-home mother, while her husband, Peter, worked as a businessman. Lydia described her younger brother as handsome, funny, and clever, saying he was very personable and could make friends in any situation. He could make friends in an empty room, she said. Pierce and Tracy shared a love for films, especially the Carry On series, and nothing made them happier than watching movies together. The family were huge dog lovers and adopted a greyhound called Mandy from a local trust. In March 2016, Tracy went to the supermarket to do her weekly shop. As she was coming out, she noticed a 23-year-old man called Aaron Barley sleeping in a cardboard box outside. Seeing him struggling in cold moved her greatly, and in that moment she knew she wanted to help him. She decided to take him back to their house on Greyhound Lane, and he had dinner with them. Tracy was keen to get him back on his feet and would offer him support in any way she could. She drove him to the council offices, and with their help, he was able to find new accommodation in a hostel. Every day, Tracy would make sure he had breakfast and dinner, also ensuring he had a hot meal every day. This stability and support was something he hadn't experienced much of, as Aaron Barley's life had been troubled and chaotic from the get-go. He had been born in 1993 out of an incestuous relationship between an uncle and niece who shared a 19-year age gap. His mother worked in a factory, and his father was a publican. His family was both disjointed and large. By the age of 6, he had been orphaned. His father had succumbed to cancer when he was just 4, and 2 years later, his mother suffered a fatal heart attack. He would spend his childhood in care, various foster homes, and with different family members. He had suffered physical and sexual abuse too. When he was 13 years old, he was at the center of a missing persons investigation, and his image was circulated after he went missing with 2 other boys in Bronze Grove. He was later found and returned to the care system. As he aged out of the system, he began sleeping on the street. He abused various substances and struggled with an alcohol addiction too. But now it looked like his life was finally starting to turn around. He appeared grateful for the help and support he had been given, and the Wilkinsons were determined to get him back on his feet. One night, whilst having dinner with the family, Aaron said to them, "I just need somebody to give me a chance. I need somebody to give me a lucky break." Tracy had battled an alcohol addiction and volunteered at the rehab center that had helped her. She knew all too well just how debilitating addiction could be, and she wanted to do everything she could to help him. Peter decided to give him a job as a laborer in one of his businesses in Newport. For the next 5 months, it seemed to be working out well. Aaron had a stable income, a roof over his head, and a family that really cared for him. But it would soon fall apart. In September, Aaron said that he had relapsed and was taking drugs again, as his mother had recently died, something that was not true. As he was no longer sober and hadn't been turning up to work, and had also been showing aggressive behavior towards managers, Peter decided to let him go from his job. It ended amicably, and the family lost contact with him. But just a couple of months later, Peter found him sleeping in the family's driveway. He was covered in bruises, and it appeared he had been assaulted. The Wilkinsons decided to help him once more. They found him accommodation, and he earned money by doing odd jobs for them. He spent Christmas Day with the family and gave Tracy a card addressing it to "the mother I never had." When the new year rolled around, he had a new flat in Brearley Hill and was in full-time employment. He would visit the Wilkinsons a couple of times a week for dinner, and things appeared to be on the up for him. However, his job as a furniture polisher would soon end as he was fired, and he would later lose his accommodation too. The Wilkinson family let him stay in their house on Greyhound Lane for 2 weeks until he found somewhere new to live. On the March 26th, Lydia came back from university and hid in the family's Land Rover to surprise her mother for Mother's Day. When Tracy opened the boot and Lydia jumped out, they both cried, so happy to be reunited with one another. Lydia wasn't back for long, and within a few days she had gone back to Bristol. Just 4 days after surprising her mother, her world would come crashing down. Thursday, March 30th, 2017. At around 10 a.m., Lydia received a call from her boyfriend saying there had been an incident in Starbridge. When she Googled it, she saw photos of her house taped off and emergency services all over Greyhound Lane. She called the police to find out what was happening, and what they told her was horrifying. At 7 a.m. that morning, Peter had taken their greyhound Mandy for a walk, just like he always did, and left his wife and son at home. He asked Pierce if he had wanted to go with him, but Pierce decided not to go, and told his dad he would go the following day. When he came back from the walk, Peter thought his wife and son had slept in, as there wasn't a cup of tea on the kitchen counter for him. like there always was for when he returned home. As he opened the back door, a man in a balaclava lunged at him from behind a wall in the kitchen, holding a knife over his head. Peter was stabbed 6 times, twice in the back, twice in the abdomen, and twice in the face. The man said, "Die, you bastard," as he stabbed him. Despite him trying to disguise his identity, Peter knew instantly who it was. Peter said to him, "Aaron, we tried to help you." Aaron Barley repeated, "Duh, you bastard," and stabbed him in the stomach. He then stole the Land Rover from the front driveway and drove off. Peter called 999 before staggering out into the garden, where he collapsed onto a chair. Emergency services rushed to the scene, and a paramedic and rapid response vehicle arrived within 7 minutes of the call. 2 ambulances were also dispatched alongside 2 air ambulance helicopters with critical care doctors and paramedics en route to assist too. When the paramedics arrived, Peter asked them to go and check on his wife and son. When the paramedic came out, Peter heard him say, "1 dead, 1 in cardiac arrest." Peter was taken to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham to be treated for his life-threatening injuries. As more emergency services arrived, they were confronted with a dreadful scene inside. Tracy had been stabbed at least 17 times and was found naked on her bedroom floor after being stabbed through her duvet as she lay in bed. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her son Pierce had at least 8 stab wounds, one of which was so severe it had nearly divided his spinal cord. He was found on his stomach struggling to breathe after he had tried to crawl along the floor. He was taken to Birmingham Children's Hospital where medical staff tried tirelessly to save him. Tragically, he later succumbed to his injuries and died. Within the course of just a few minutes, Peter had lost his wife and son, and Lydia had lost her mother and little brother. After stealing the car, Barley was captured on dash cams both inside the stolen vehicle and from other road users, driving the Land Rover away from police. But before long, he crashed. After a brief chase, Aaron Barley was taken into custody. A knife wrapped in a wet shirt was found in the car. For Lydia, who was in Bristol, the nightmare that was unfolding was impossible to comprehend. She had been due to come back home the following day to choose a dress for her university ball. She had promised Pia she would be there at the school gates to meet him. As she was driven to Birmingham to be with her father, she said she began thinking that she would have to plan a triple funeral on her own. When she arrived at the hospital, she was taken to the critical care ward where her father was being treated. Doctors surrounded his bed and he was hooked up to various machines before going into surgery to try and save his life. West Midlands Police and the West Midlands Ambulance Service gave a statement to the press. As her father was fighting for his life, Lydia was faced with the horrific task of identifying the bodies of her younger brother and mother. She said, "I went in and I just stayed with my mom and brother for a while and said that I was sorry I couldn't protect them, and I stroked their hair. I stayed there because I knew that was going to be the last time I saw them in my life. From that point on, it was a case of I lived every day for Dad." She stayed by Peter's bedside holding his hand, hoping he would regain consciousness. And eventually he did. Peter would ultimately survive and was in hospital for 11 days, 6 of which were in intensive care. He was then told the news that his beloved wife and son had died. The community of Starbridge was in total shock. Flowers were laid at the house in tribute, with many people coming to pay their respects and try and come to terms with what had happened. Lydia showed enormous bravery and strength by going back to the house to lay flowers for her little brother and mother. Pierce's school also paid tribute to him. The police were now trying to piece together exactly what had happened. And when watching the CCTV footage from the family home, the horrifying truth came to light. It showed Aaron Barty climbing over the garden fence the night before. He hid in the garden shed throughout the night after he had failed to break into the house. As morning broke, he waited for Peter to leave. CCTV then showed him crawling across the garden, being careful to not be seen. He then entered the home, which was unlocked, and pulled a balaclava over his face to conceal his identity. He took 2 knives from the kitchen, and after going upstairs he stabbed Tracy in her bed and Pierce in his bedroom in a frenzied, violent, and ferocious attack. He then lay in wait for Peter to come back. Aaron Barley's lack of remorse was shocking. He would later say to a police officer, "I've stabbed 3 people up. I ain't bothered about taking one of you with me." When it was unclear as to whether or not Peter was going to survive, he told a prison nurse who had asked him about being homeless. "What? 2 murders and possibly a third. I don't think I'll need any help with that." He also told a police officer, "I chopped them up. I don't need a solicitor." He refused to have a toxicology test done to determine if he was under the influence of any substances. He refused to give any reason for his crime, and his motive remains unknown. He bragged in custody about killing the mother and son, saying he was glad they were dead. The only regret he showed was that he hadn't succeeded in murdering Peter. Less than 1 week before the murders, the Wilkinsons had canceled a phone contract they had paid for Barley as he had failed to contact them for 3 weeks. Tracy also told friends that she had seen him looking over the fence at her home and that she didn't want anything else to do with him. Aaron Barley had a long history of violence and antisocial behavior. When he was 11 years old, he was removed from a foster home in Worcester following violent attacks on other children in the home. As he grew up, he continued to show increasing violence with a former resident of the care home. He lived in saying he was deeply troubled. He would often get into fights and even stole a member of staff's car. He also wrote a hit list of people he wanted to kill. He had a string of 21 previous convictions, the first of which he got when he was just 12 years old for grievous bodily harm. Other offenses included assaulting a police officer, drugs charges, possession of a firearm, and assaulting a former partner with a piece of wood. He had hit her 50 times with it before breaking it in half and trying to stab her with it. For this offense, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison at the age of 18. He attended a school for children with social, emotional, or behavioral needs, and those who knew him described him as cocky, saying he often said disgusting and misogynistic things about people's female friends and relatives. Nobody socialized with him. He had also been reported to the police after his previous foster carer had read several posts on Facebook that had caused great concern. He had threatened his family, who he said hadn't spoken to him in years, and messages also said, "Got to try and get some help before I go on a killing spree." Those who had volunteered at the rehabilitation center stated that Bali had said he wanted to kill someone using a knife. They also reported that he said he had 2 aims in life, one being to kill a prison officer and the other to kill a police officer. However, his comments were not taken seriously with the belief they were caused by his drug abuse. In February 2017, just a month before he committed the murders, he had met with a project worker for additional support. She made the assessment that he was seeking control, being manipulative and playing mind games, and in a text message, he referred to himself as a predator saying, "Stay a predator, change the prey." On Wednesday, June 7, 2017, Pearson Tracy's funeral service was held at St. Mary's Church. Pearson Tracy shared a coffin, with Pierce's godfather saying in his eulogy, "Some of you may be surprised to see just the one coffin, but they are together, inseparable, as they always were in life." Lydia said her brother and mother were as close as a mother and son could be and shared a true bond of love that could never be broken. Mandy, the family's dog, and other dogs from a rescue center formed a guard of honor as the coffin was taken into the church. The Kidderminster Male Voice Choir began the service by singing "Can't Help Falling in Love" and ended with Pierce's favorite song, "Hooked on a Feeling." Once again, the courage and bravery of the Wilkinson family was incredible. On the first day of his trial at Birmingham Crown Court, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. As his former charges were read out to the court, Barley rocked from side to side in the dock before shouting, "I've done what I've done. There's no need to stand here and lie." Psychiatric tests were carried out, and it was determined that nothing could provide a defense on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Kareem Khalil, for the prosecution, said that Bali was a compulsive liar and manipulator. One of his former foster carers described him as a Jekyll and Hyde character, saying on the one hand he could be sensitive and caring, and on the other hand violent and threatening. A former care home resident said of him, "Apart from the anger, he wasn't an emotional person. We never saw him crying. He didn't like being touched. It's as though he didn't feel anything. He was the type of kid who, if he saw something upsetting happen to someone, he wouldn't get upset or cry. He would just stand and watch. It was like he was in his body but detached from it." His defense lawyer Jonas Hankins said that Bali's chaotic childhood had seen him be pushed from pillar to post and around various different foster homes. He said that Barley was suffering from borderline personality disorder, and he had perceived the family had turned their back on him, before adding there was no evidence to actually substantiate this, and that the Wilkinsons had shown extraordinary kindness towards him. The presiding judge, Mrs. Justice Carr, said that what Barley had done was a vicious and unprovoked attack on those who had demonstrated extraordinary kindness and generosity. Lydia Wilkinson addressed the court with a victim impact statement. "My parents helped you. You repaid them with destruction and heartache. You have obliterated my life, murdered half my family, very nearly all of it. I am a shell of my former self. Sometimes I wake up and don't want to be here. What did they do to deserve this?" She added that she would never forgive Barley for what he had done. He appeared to cry as she spoke and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." The judge praised Lydia for her courage and bravery, saying she had demonstrated a maturity well beyond her years. She emphasized the impact that this had had on Lydia, saying, "She has anxiety attacks and cannot be left alone." Peter also spoke to the court. "There's no motive. There is no explanation. He decided that because his life was going bad ways, he was going to take it out on people that had cared and looked after him. I wish we had never met him. I wish my wife had never set eyes on him." 24-year-old Aaron Barley was sentenced to life in prison. With a minimum term of 30 years, the judge had decided against giving him a whole life order, mainly due to how old he was. She told him though he may never be released, and he sat emotionless and didn't react. "You clearly represent a very significant risk of serious harm to members of the public," she said. The Solicitor General Robert Bookland appealed for the sentence to be reviewed for being unduly lenient. Lord Justice Holroyd said that the original trial judge, Mrs. Justice Carr, was entitled to conclude that a whole life order was not to be handed down. He did add that the only mitigating factors were his admission and his psychiatric problems, but that also his mental health issues had not stopped him from planning and committing the crime. 3 judges ruled that due to the most exceptional grave case, his minimum term needed to be increased, and it was increased to 35 years. Aaron Barley will only become eligible for parole once he has served his minimum term, and also is able to prove that he is no longer a danger. Only time will tell if he is ever fit to be released. Lydia said, "My mom and dad did an amazing thing, and I would never discourage anyone from helping others in a similar way, but I would always encourage people to go through the charities and organizations specifically set up for that type of thing. These charities know the system and they have the correct vetting processes in place. There are a lot of people out there who are in some unfortunate situations and need help, and it is an amazing thing to be able to help them." In October, teachers from Pierce's school announced that they were going to run a marathon in his memory. They were going to raise money for the Greyhound Trust, Pierce's favorite charity, which helps to find new homes for greyhounds across the country. His teachers' efforts raised an amazing £3,550. The school was also working with Lydia to commission a commemorative sculpture, working with a local artist. Peter and Lydia moved back to the home on Greyhound Lane, with Peter saying, "It's our home. After taking so much from us, we couldn't possibly have it that he would take anything else. We love the house. It is very much a family home that we had built and renovated ourselves, and we liked being there." They had also received much support from their local priest, who was there to bless every room in the home when they moved back in. The house would later be put up for sale in February 2018. Lydia also went back to university to carry on with her studies. She said, "We are determined to not let this take away any more of our life. I'd like to be a researcher to do medical research, to continue the help and support that my mom would give to people. By researching things like cancer and Parkinson's disease, I hope to give back to people and continue her legacy." Lydia said that she does not feel hatred for Aaron Barley and that it was more important to her to channel her energy than to building something positive from what had happened. She was able to raise £13,000 for Birmingham Children's Hospital, the hospital that had tried so hard to save her little brother. The loss of Tracy and Pierce is immeasurable, and for those who knew and loved them, the pain is incalculable. Tracy was a generous and compassionate woman who refused to turn away from anyone who needed her help. She and Peter together raised 2 incredibly kind and thoughtful children who always considered others and wanted to support those in need. Although the void left by their deaths will never be filled, the lasting legacy Pierce and Tracy have created, be it through the children who will be looked after by Birmingham Children's Hospital or the greyhounds who will be cared for and find a new home, will live on for many years to come. 32-year-old Lauren Cole Then Thompson was a single mother to 3 children, ages 3, 5, and 9, at the start of 2019. On the afternoon of January 10th, she was spending time with a group of friends in Panola County, Texas, after having gone fishing earlier in the day. Just before 2 p.m., Lauren called her mother, Tori Colvin, sounding anxious. She asked to speak to her children, but they couldn't come to the phone at that moment. Tori thought she heard an argument in the background. Lauren apologized for her previous behavior and told her mother that if she ever got out of the situation she was in, she would never use drugs again. Tori asked if Lauren was in trouble and suggested she call local authorities if she needed help. Lauren responded by telling her mother that she loved her and asked her to tell her father the same, apologizing before hanging up. The 7-minute phone call ended precisely at 2 p.m. 8 minutes later, Lauren made a 911 call. In a panic, Lauren told the dispatcher she was being chased. The call lasted over 20 minutes before abruptly cutting off. Authorities were unable to reconnect despite several attempts, and they suspected her cell phone had run out of battery. Lauren had given the dispatcher her location, and authorities quickly responded. They found Lauren's vehicle stuck in a muddy ditch along an oil and gas lease road off County Road 267 at FM 1794, just west of the Rock Creek community. When they arrived at the nearby home of the man who had been driving the vehicle with Lauren, he was there, getting his own vehicle to bring back to the scene to pull Lauren's car out of the ditch. He told them that they had been driven off the road by another car. Paint transfer on Lauren's supported this claim. He had told Lauren to stay with her car while he walked home to get his vehicle and some chains to pull her car out of the ditch. Later that evening, authorities also located one of Lauren's shoes. Between the location of the vehicle, where they found the shoe, and the pings from Lauren's cell phone during her 911 call, they were able to approximate the path Lauren took as she ran away from her car. The initial search for her lasted all night, but Lauren was not found. In the months following Lauren's disappearance, authorities searched more than 2,000 acres of land on the ground and 9,000 acres from the air with helicopters and drones over the course of multiple searches. Large sections of the search area were heavily wooded, making them difficult to search. Furthermore, there was extensive flooding in the area at the time Lauren disappeared, making certain places impossible to search until months after she went missing. All-terrain vehicles and search dogs were brought in to help with the searches, which received personnel from numerous agencies, including the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. The Texas Rangers and the FBI have provided resources to the investigation. The 3 individuals Lauren was known to be with on the day she disappeared have been interviewed and taken polygraph examinations. One of them passed away in the months after Lauren went missing. In the first few months following Lauren's disappearance, there were some disagreements between her family and law enforcement. Lauren's parents, Tori and G.W. Colvin, have been very active in looking for their daughter and had hoped to organize further searches for her. However, so far, only members of law enforcement have participated in searches, and the Colvins were told at one point that this was in part because the area course with volunteers from outside of law enforcement. There are, of course, other concerns authorities have about volunteer searches. We had a lot of local people offering to search too. Not that we don't appreciate that, and there's times that's utilized, but when we have teams that are available to come that are used to dealing with and trained to deal with crime scenes, and we have the potential to have a crime scene. Obviously, that's who we want on the ground so we don't contaminate everything, said Panola County Sheriff Kevin Lake. The Panola County Sheriff's Office has denied requests from the media to release the recording of the 911 call Lauren made, as they believe it contains information important to their investigation. Joey Ortega, a private investigator working on the case with the Colvins and acting as their spokesperson, was allowed to listen to the tape and agrees with this decision. Lauren's parents were also allowed to listen to recording. According to Tori Colvin, while her daughter sounded anxious when she spoke to her just prior to her disappearance, she sounded coherent and not as terrified as she sounded during the 911 call. While authorities initially believed the 911 call ended abruptly because Lauren's cell phone battery died, further investigation has shown that the phone, in fact, continued to ping after the call ended. The final ping occurred 20 minutes after the 911 call ended. Tori Cole then has also stated after hearing the recording that at the end of the call, it sounded like Lauren had been startled by someone. According to Joey Ortega, the fact that the phone continued to ping along with that data showing that the call ended nowhere near any river or place where one was likely to run into a wild animal, along with her claim that she was being chased, all lends to a reasonable belief that she was in fact kidnapped and not lost, drowned, or attacked by an animal. Sheriff Lake says his office has not yet found solid evidence confirming that foul play is involved in Lauren's disappearance and will not rule that foul play is involved until such evidence is found. We can speculate, but it's not our job to speculate. We're fact finders, and so we have not collected any evidence to make us confirm that foul play is involved, he said in February of 2020. Could there be foul play involved? Absolutely, and that's why we're so concerned about preserving if we find a crime scene. He has also stated that he does not believe that Lauren willingly walked away from her life because she would not have left behind her children. Lauren's family initially offered a $5,000 reward for information in the case and doubled that reward to $10,000 in June of 2020. They also announced the creation of a tip line which would allow individuals to call in or text information about the case while remaining anonymous and avoiding direct contact with law enforcement. In the press release announcing this information, the family said that they hoped that through their independent efforts and working in concert with law enforcement, they can get a clear picture of what happened to Lauren that January afternoon. Amanda Grudge was born in the United Kingdom in 1964 and moved to the United States before she was a year old. After living in several states, Amanda's mother Sylvia left Amanda's father and took Amanda with her to Canada. Amanda was shy as a child but grew into a determined and independent adult. On the evening of August 21, 1991, 27-year-old Amanda was at the apartment she shared with her mother on Enfield Place in Mississauga, Ontario. She had several piercings in each her ears and was having trouble removing one of her earrings as she was getting ready to go out for the evening. Sylvia had to help her daughter remove it. Amanda then left the apartment for the night, taking just a purse with her. She never came home. Amanda would sometimes spend a night or two at a friend's home, so Sylvia did not immediately panic when she was not home the following morning. Once several days went by with no sign of Amanda, however, she knew something was wrong and went to the police. The police did not take the disappearance seriously and may not have investigated it at all. When the Ontario Provincial Police began investigating the case years later, no missing persons file on Amanda with the local authorities could be located. Sylvia was told that Amanda was an adult who could make decisions without informing her mother. Sylvia believes that Amanda's lifestyle may have played a role in how the authorities viewed her disappearance. Amanda had suffered from an eating disorder and eventually developed problems with drugs and alcohol. She ran with a rough crowd, and her employment history working as a hairstylist and bartender was spotty. Amanda was known to police, having previously spent a few days in jail on minor charges. More relevant to her disappearance was the fact that she had been involved with a police investigation in the summer of 1991 and had been about to appear as a witness against several of her acquaintances when she went missing. Just a few days before Amanda disappeared, her mother had received a phone call from a man with a Caribbean accent. He did not identify himself but told Sylvia that if Amanda testified in court, she would never be seen again. Sylvia believes that it is possible Amanda left home to protect both herself and her mother from retribution from the people she was due to testify against. It is of course also possible that she disappeared because she met with foul play at the hands of one or more of those people. Without assistance from the police, Sylvia looked for her daughter on her own. In the months following Amanda's disappearance, she regularly traveled to downtown Toronto looking for her or anyone who knew her. She ran ads in the Toronto Star asking for information for years. In the years since she disappeared, Amanda has not used her health insurance or credit cards, and there has been no record of her using her driver's license as a form of identification. She did not have a passport at the time of her disappearance, and there is no record of her crossing the border into the United States, which did not always require a passport. Amanda's name made it to the missing persons list maintained by the Ontario Provincial Police in 2007 following an investigation by a different regional police force into a set of unidentified human remains which were ultimately found to not belong to Amanda. This resulted in new inquiries but no new answers. In 2016, the case was sent to the OPP's Criminal Investigations Branch as a matter of routine. In 2017, they formally reopened the case following an unconfirmed sighting of Amanda in Illinois, but she remains missing. I look back on many things, and yes, she tried to protect me and probably still does to this day if she's out there, alive. Amanda's mother, Sylvia, said in 2017, "I want people to know that Amanda was a good person, and no matter what she may have done that was wrong, she loved me and I her." In 2011, 33-year-old Anthony Tyrone Lee lived in Longview, Texas with his mother, Sharon Bowers. That June, he was about to make a trip to Houston, where he would be helping his sister move into a new home. Prior to leaving on that trip, he had plans to attend a rodeo with his mother. However, on June 25th, the day of the rodeo, his mother arrived home only to find that her son was not there. Sharon quickly realized that something was not right. The ironing board had been set up and the clothes Anthony had planned to wear to the rodeo were with it. However, one of the pant legs was still hanging off of the side of the board, as though Anthony had been in the middle of ironing the pants and was somehow interrupted. Anthony's clothing and shoes were still in the home, and as best as Sharon could determine, her son had left home wearing his house shoes, which was out of character for him. Anthony's mood had recently changed, and he had been acting in the weeks before he went missing. He had $600 in the bank, which remained in his account untouched. 3 weeks after Anthony's disappearance, Sharon began receiving disturbing phone calls. At first, the caller would play what Sharon described as some kind of death song. Then came calls from someone telling Sharon that's what he gets for snitching. The last person Anthony saw prior to his disappearance, as far as his mother knows, was a known local drug dealer who had wrecked Anthony's car a week before he went missing. Sharon feared that Anthony may have gotten himself into a situation where either he felt like he needed to go into hiding or someone else was holding him somewhere. However, since Anthony left behind his belongings and his money, and because of the phone calls, Sharon is not optimistic that he will return home. "I don't feel like my child is still living," she told the Longview News Journal. "After all the flyers and all the friends he has, it's just not like him to not call and talk to anybody." The Longview Police Department ran out of leads to follow by the first anniversary of Anthony's disappearance, but has not given up on his case. Anthony is listed in state and national missing persons databases. "There's somebody that knows what happened to my son, and all we want is to know too," Sharon Bowers said in 2012. At 11:30 p.m. on March 9, 2014, at 3385 Airport Road in Dalton, Georgia, a gas station called Cancun's Express was the scene of a shocking discovery. 2 regular customers entered the store and immediately noticed it was in complete disarray. Mark, one of the customers, peered over the counter and saw money, lottery tickets, and other items scattered across the floor. It was clear a robbery had taken place, but there was no one around, and the store was eerily silent. Mark decided to investigate further and noticed the door to the employees' area at the back was slightly ajar. He cautiously looked inside and saw a person's legs, surrounded by a lot of blood. Mark and the other customer quickly left the store and waited outside for the police. But there was still uncertainty about whether the person behind the door was alive. One brave customer decided to re-enter the store to check. It didn't take long for her to confirm that the individual was already deceased. The victim was 37-year-old Diabi Kadas Chadhari, known to everyone as DK. Originally from India, DK had traveled to the United States alone, eager to embrace a new life. From the moment he arrived, he worked tirelessly to build a fresh start and immediately felt at home in America. After spending some time in New Jersey, he had moved to Dalton, Georgia, a place he seemed to prefer greatly. As he had come over by himself, people said he had started to create his own little family in Dalton. Becoming close to his co-workers and his customers, DK was now really starting to find his feet in a new routine. He had only been at Cancun's Express for a couple of months, and typically worked the graveyard shift, starting at around 7 p.m. But late nights and long hours didn't ever deter him. His coworkers said the man who called everyone buddy and greeted customers with a big smile made such an effort to remember the regulars and get to know the people he served. They said you couldn't have met a friendlier and kinder person, always happy to talk to anyone about anything, whether they were known to him or just someone topping up their gas, never to return again. He just wanted to make friends, work hard, and enjoy his new life in America. Everyone was in disbelief that this had happened to him. When police arrived at the store, it was evident the attack had been a very frenzied and vicious one, with the motive appearing to be a robbery. DK had tape over his mouth and eyes and had been stabbed multiple times. He was covered in defensive wounds and had tried hard to fight back. The medical examiner later determined he had survived the whole ordeal, only to bleed out about 10 minutes after the attack had finished. On the floor under a trolley near to D.K. body, they found their first piece of evidence, a mobile phone which was swiftly bagged up. With 7 cameras covering the whole area, even if a few weren't working or were bad quality, detectives were confident they would be able to get something from them. They were elated, however, when they realized all of the cameras were working perfectly, and the images were pretty clear too. In the moments before the attack, DK was serving customers as usual and walking around the store checking the aisles. It was now around 10:30 p.m., about 4.5 hours into his shift. Nothing seemed to be off, and as the store seemed quiet, DK headed over to the back room. Without warning, in a split second the perpetrator appeared chasing him from behind, pinning him into the back room. They were wearing a white hoodie pulled over their face, sunglasses, latex gloves, and a big black bag. DK tried to slam the door, but the killer was too quick. Once inside, they started stamping on him, brandishing a gun. DK managed to hit the gun away, and it slid across the tiles. But the perpetrator pulled out a knife and started stabbing him repeatedly before putting duct tape over his eyes and mouth. They then squatted down next to him before pressing their hands over his face, suffocating him as he bled out. While all this was going on, there were now customers walking around the store, completely unaware as to what was unfolding in the back. The perpetrator then exited the back room and paced around the aisles. One customer by the name of Charles was now at the counter looking to buy a drink. But he was met with, unbeknownst to him, the killer at the cash register, who shook their head and indicated Charles needed to leave. He walked outside quickly and afraid, and after the store was empty, the suspect proceeded to ransack the cash register area, taking a huge roll of lottery tickets and around $200 in cash. They took it all into the back where they had left their bag, shoving it all in there. They then calmly walked out of the store and off into the night. Police were shocked at just how cold-blooded, vicious, and remorseless this crime was, with some saying they had never even heard of anything like this in their careers, let alone seen it with their own eyes. Even though the footage of the murder happening did not show the killer's face, it was still a strong set of videos. It was clear, confirmed the timings, and showed the person's height, build, and clothing very well. Charles, who had interacted with the suspect at the counter, came forward. He said it was a really unsettling moment, and he didn't know what was going on. But he knew he needed to leave the premises. Whereas the police initially thought they were looking for a male suspect, Charles's story made them realize they were not. Realizing there was no one there to serve him, he went to the counter to pick up his card and leave. He then saw the person in the white hoodie lurking behind the register. He said she looked at him and said, "We're not open for business." He told officers it sounded like she was putting on a fake voice. Looking back at the footage to just before the murder, the camera at the entrance to Cancun's Express showed the woman entering the store, but she was wearing all black. She headed into the bathroom where she changed into the white hoodie she would shortly be seen in. Detectives released the footage, feeling confident they could get a lead off of the back of it. And very quickly they did. It had now been just over 24 hours since DK had been murdered, and the police received an anonymous tip. The caller said they needed to look for a person by the name of Sky Raven Marie Mims, a 21-year-old model, aspiring rapper, and dancer. Sky appeared to have no criminal history and wasn't known to the authorities at all. So this was a total shock and left the police wondering if they were seeking the right person. But there was another gas station across the road from Cancun's, and this also showed her on these cameras too. In the footage, her hood was now down and they had a pretty clear picture of her face. She had even used her card in this station. No sooner had this tip come in that the forensics on the phone had also come back, and it belonged to Sky Mims. A statewide manhunt was now underway to find her, and the media were running with all the details. There was no indication as to where she was. Her last known address was in Detroit, and it appeared she was bouncing from state to state. Following an extensive 2-day search, Sky Mims was finally located. She had been hiding out in a friend's house about 30 minutes away from Dalton. When police knocked on the door, she had tried to escape. She was naked and screaming at the police to just shoot and kill her. She said, "You saw what I did. You caught me red-handed." She was placed in handcuffs and taken out of the house wrapped in a bedsheet. On the way into the station in the back of the police car, she managed to wriggle out of the handcuffs, something which clearly unnerved the officer driving. In her first interview with the police, she was both aggressive and totally vacant before asking for a lawyer and walking up to the camera in the room and shouting and swearing into it. But officers were gathering so much from the house she had been hiding in that her refusal to talk didn't really matter at this point. Inside her bag were latex gloves, a roll of the same red duct tape that was found around DK's face, some of the lottery tickets, a gun, and a knife, with what they presumed was DK's blood still on it. There was absolutely nothing to suggest that Sky knew DK at all. It was a completely random attack, and police argued that the second she walked into the store, she had already decided she was going to kill whoever got in her way. Her DNA was taken and quickly processed, confirming everything they already knew. The expert said she matched at all 15 locations for both gloves. The frequency for that is 1 in 5 quintillion, and the blood on the knife found in her bag matched DK. Sky Mims was charged, and a grand jury soon indicted her on several counts, including felony murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, burglary, armed robbery, possession of a knife during the commission of a felony, and theft by bringing stolen property into the state, which was a stolen car. As the various procedures and hearings began, everyone that knew DK was still reeling from his death, and the small community was left shaken in the aftermath. A collection jar was set up at the entrance of the store so people could send something to his family back in India and try and help in any way they could. DK's funeral was big, with a lot of people standing along the sides, including detectives who had been working on the case. Sky entered a plea of not guilty to all of the charges, and whilst awaiting trial, she faced a further felony charge of breaking a sprinkler head in her cell, which caused the cell to flood. Her charges were mounting up, and she now had 11 against her. But the most serious of all, felony murder, meant she could potentially face the death penalty if she was found guilty. Before her trial began, she was assessed by a psychologist who diagnosed her with bipolar disorder. But her attorney said she felt that her client had something more severe and undiagnosed. Her trial finally started just over a year after DK's murder. During the proceedings, Sky either sat and laughed or just stared into space, completely void of any remorse, but seemingly enjoying the attention when she saw people looking at her. She had asked to testify on her own behalf, but her attorney had said no. Many testified, including friends of Sky, who said that in recent months she had become totally obsessed with winning the lottery. She was focused particularly on winning one that could give her $500 a week for life, and these are the exact same tickets she had stolen from the store. Friends said she thought if she won, she would be able to pursue her dream of performing without worrying about funds. After 5 days, the juries entered their deliberations. It took less than an hour for them to return a verdict of guilty on all counts. On the grounds of mental health issues and a previously clean criminal history, Sky's attorney was pushing for the chance of parole to give her a second chance. But the judge said she was read her rights and was more than happy she understood them. Sky's father Mario gave a statement as well, describing their family history of mental health issues, including bipolar disorder and paranoid schizophrenia. Mario also said Sky would tell people she was being chased by aliens or that people were trying to kill her. Mario had tried to check her into a hospital, but she had left quickly before stealing a car and fleeing. He said, "She kind of slipped out of our hands. We couldn't grab her, touch her, nothing." Despite both he and her attorney's protests, Skye Mims was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge took the potential death penalty off the table after her bipolar disorder diagnosis. And when Skye's attorney expressed her disappointment at the sentence given, the judge pointed out he had already been lenient enough in taking the death penalty out of the equation. He called her crime methodical, vicious, and senseless, and was particularly disgusted when she had started laughing as the evidence was presented. He said life without parole was more than justified considering the circumstances. The defendant has shown zero remorse. She has shown zero acceptance of what she did. We don't think she should ever be free again, he said. It was a good result for the prosecution, and they said, we are pleased, obviously. We're happy for the community and happy for the family. The evidence in this case was overwhelming, so the verdict is not unexpected. We're just glad to get the case tried and get closure for friends and family that lost a good man. It was soon announced that Skye was seeking a new trial. As a result, in 2019, the charge of theft of a car was reversed, but the murder conviction was upheld and Skye remains in prison, still serving out her life without parole sentence. DK's body was eventually sent back to India to be with his brothers, but the loss his co-workers and friends felt back in America ran deep. He had built a nice life for himself there and made so many new friends. He had many plans and dreams. It was such a heartbreaking end for him. One of his friends said, DK's smile could brighten your day. He never met a stranger. He spoke to everyone. He would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. He was so kind and had the biggest heart of anyone I know. Baron Layman was born in Germany but moved to Australia in the 1960s, eventually becoming an Australian citizen. He lived in Ashfield, a suburb in the inner west of Sydney, and worked as a caretaker for disabled individuals. On February 12, 2008, Baron was scheduled to fly back to Germany on a 4:55 p.m. flight out of Sydney, planning to spend 3 months there to care for his critically ill mother. However, Baron never boarded his flight, and 2 days later, on Valentine's Day, he was found dead in the kitchen of his apartment on Alternate Street around 7 p.m. Authorities determined Baron's time of death to be between 11:15 a.m. and the time he was supposed to board his flight on the 12th. He had died from severe head injuries, and there were signs of a violent struggle in his apartment. Police later described the brutal attack he endured as both vicious and frenzied. They believe Baron had been struck in the head approximately 20 times with a 6-pound statue, and that his killer had subsequently made an unsuccessful attempt to decapitate him with a knife from the kitchen. Robbery was eliminated as a motive as nothing was stolen from the apartment. Police suspected, based on the extent of the injuries inflicted to Baron and the rage that must have been behind them, that there was some sort of emotional motivation to the crime. To investigate the murder, Strike Force Nava was created, bringing together detectives from Burwood Police Area Command and the State Crime Command's Homicide Squad. A $100,000 reward was offered for information in the case, and investigators followed up on Baron's known friends and associates looking for potential suspects, but years would drag on with no arrests. A coronial inquest into the case was held in 2012, after which the case was sent to the Unsolved Homicide Unit. In 2018, investigators revisited DNA evidence collected at the crime scene. The new review was initially conducted by the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Technology Command, and the samples were then sent to the Genetic Ancestry Laboratory maintained by the University of Canberra and the University of Technology Sydney to undergo DNA phenotyping. The laboratory was able to confirm that the DNA came from a male but not from Baron Layman. Their analysis found that the contributor of the DNA probably did not have blonde hair or blue eyes and was most likely of mixed European, Middle Eastern, and African ancestry. Unfortunately, there was no match to the DNA on file. Because it was a violent crime, they left a lot of forensic evidence behind, and that was exposed in our benefit. Detective Danny Doherty, New South Wales Police Homicide Squad Commander, would later say, DNA was found on 8 cigarette butts left in Baron's lounge and in semen on his body. According to Detective Superintendent Doherty, it's not just DNA, it's where it's found in the unit, and it's found in places where it gives us confidence that this person will be charged later on. In February of 2021, police announced that the New South Wales government was increasing the reward for information in the case to $1 million in a renewed effort to generate tips from the public. Less than a month later, on March 17, 2021, 66-year-old Najee Fakrudin was arrested outside his home in Arncliffe at 7:30 in the morning and was later formally charged with Baron Layman's murder. Fakrudin had initially come to the attention of the authorities, thanks to information from a member of the public. However, he was initially only known to them as an unnamed associate. Police were later able to use what they have described as innovative techniques to identify him and match his DNA to the DNA found at the crime scene. Due to ongoing court proceedings, authorities have not been able to provide details on these methods and techniques. However, one of Fakrudin's 8 children is a high-ranking member of a motorcycle gang and is currently incarcerated for drug trafficking. This would give authorities access to his DNA, which means it is possible that police were then led to his father through familial DNA. Following his arrest, the elder Fakrudin was brought in for questioning and for further belief that Baron and Fakrudin were casual acquaintances. A motive has not been firmly established. Detective Superintendent Doherty could not elaborate on what police believed the motive to be due to the ongoing court proceedings, but did reiterate that robbery had been excluded as a motive. When asked by the media if Baron's sexuality had some role in the motive, Detective Superintendent Doherty could not exclude that possibility. Fakrudin appeared before the Sutherland local court on March 17th. He did not enter a plea and was denied bail by the court. His next court appearance is scheduled for May. For Baron to die in such a violent way, after spending his life caring and helping others, this senseless murder has been a great source of sadness for us all, said Claudia Wolf, a family friend of Baron's, after Fakrudin's arrest. We hope that this will be the first step for his friends here and his family in Germany to get some closure and to find out why this happened. Mildred Meeni was born on February 27, 1907 in Arkansas and was one of 6 children. Her father died of a heart attack when she was young, leaving Mildred's mother to raise the children on her own. As an adult, Mildred married, had a son, and became a nurse. According to her son, Gary, she was articulate and thrifty. She was talented at cooking and at sewing, and could make shirts for her son out of hog feed bags that he claimed were nicer than anyone's available at any store. Mildred worked for 40 years as a psychiatric nurse in Little Rock and was dedicated to her family. These two aspects of her life would eventually intersect, and she would provide care for her brother when his mental state began to decline. Unfortunately, Mildred began losing her own mental faculties when she was in her 70s, and she herself required help from her siblings. Mildred, now a widow, moved to Lake Worth, Florida to live with her younger sister, Gladys Nowlin, when she began suffering from dementia. Mildred could not leave home on her own because her condition would cause her to become disoriented and get lost. She did leave the home on her own on a few occasions and would wander around the neighborhood, requiring help to get back home. She would often be found near a laundromat close to her sister's house. On April 27, 1985, 78-year-old Mildred again somehow got out of the house on her own. Witnesses reported seeing her walking in the neighborhood sometime between 3:30 and 4 p.m., wearing an orange blouse over her pink pajamas. Upon realizing that Mildred had gotten out of the house, Mildred's sister, Gladys, went to the laundromat where Mildred had wandered off to in the past. She was not there. Gladys could not find Mildred in the neighborhood, so she reported her missing at 4:30 p.m. Just before 10 p.m. that same night, a passerby traveling on Old Indiantown Road near 125th Avenue in Jupiter, approximately 30 miles north of Lake Worth, discovered Mildred along a dirt road. Mildred was unconscious, having been severely beaten. Police would later say that they believed her head had been beaten with a blunt object. She was naked, and her clothes and blood-stained dentures were found nearby. She had been raped. Mildred was rushed to Martin Memorial Hospital in Stuart, Florida. Her son Gary rushed to Florida from his home in Arkansas to be with her. Mildred died as a result of her injuries on May 8, 1985, 11 days after she was attacked. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide caused by a heart arrhythmia stemming from her injuries, including a skull fracture and internal bleeding. Witnesses reported seeing Mildred near the intersection of Dixie Highway and Lucerne Avenue, less than 2 miles from her home. She had gotten into a brown, two-door 1967 Oldsmobile Delta 88 with a white interior driven by a man who told the witnesses that he was her neighbor and would be driving her home. Despite having such a specific description of his vehicle and of man himself from the witnesses, police in 1985 could not identify the man. Mildred's case went cold despite police revisiting the case and issuing new appeals to the public for information over the years. In March of 2021, the DNA profile extracted from vaginal swabs taken from Mildred was entered into the combined DNA index system and a match was found. Police obtained a warrant for a new DNA sample and then visited the home of the man, whose DNA matched that from Mildred's rape kit, taking a new cheek swab to confirm the match. Testing of the DNA from that swab confirmed that it was this suspect's DNA found on the swab from the rape kit. On April 22, 2021, 61-year-old Richard Curtis Lang Sr. of Boynton Beach, Florida was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and sexual assault with a weapon or force. He pled not guilty to the charges the following day and is currently being held without bond at the Palm Beach County Jail. Lang has a criminal record which includes aggravated assault convictions in 1983-1993. He has faced minor drug charges as well as gun charges in 2006 and 2012. He has never served more than a short jail sentence. He was obligated to provide a sample of his DNA in 2006 after he pleaded guilty to a charge of carrying a concealed weapon and was given probation. His arrest record lists his current occupation as disabled. Lang's attorney, Scott Skier, says his client vehemently denies any involvement in the crime. We look forward to aggressively challenging the forensic evidence attributed to Mr. Lang. Nothing in Mr. Lang's past indicates a propensity for such abhorrent behavior, Mr. Skeeter said in a statement. Now 88 years old, Mildred's son, Gary Matheny, had given up hope that his mother's killer would be found and was overjoyed to learn that such a major development had finally been made in her case. It's been a long, long time, and I'm thankful to the cold case people for finding that dastardly SOB. It was a terrible death for my mother, he said following Lang's arrest. 59-year-old Virginia Hannan was a widow who lived alone on West Street in Pembroke, Massachusetts. For many years, she worked as a cook and lunch lady at Bryantville Elementary School. Her love of children and of food extended beyond her work, and she was known to bake treats to give out to the children who lived in her neighborhood. She also had a love of animals and cared for stray dogs and cats. According to her family, she was a happy person who was always fun to be around. She loved her community and was dedicated to her family. On February 13, 1984, Virginia's body was found on her bed, covered by a sheet. Police believed she had been killed the night before on February 12th. She had been stabbed once in the eye and 6 times in the abdomen, kicked so hard that a shoe imprint was left on her body and strangled with nylon stockings. Virginia's murder was the first in Pembroke in a decade, and it came as a shock to her community. Her family was heartbroken to lose such a kind woman in such a brutal fashion. Police initially theorized that Virginia had been killed during a botched break-in. Virginia had recently retired from her job at the school after inheriting $380,000 from her aunt, who had lived in California. Virginia never flaunted her wealth, still driving her old car and being thrifty with her purchases. However, she had told friends about the money, so word of it may have spread through town. And Virginia's killer may have come to her home to try to steal some of her newfound wealth. Police launched an extensive investigation and interviewed more than 50 people, but no arrests were made and the case went cold. Authorities continued to revisit it, and Virginia's family worked to keep the case alive, holding vigils for Virginia as recently as 2019 to mark the 35th anniversary of her death. Earlier that same year, in January of 2019, authorities had re-examined the evidence from the case and found that DNA found on broken glass from Virginia's door, bloody paper towels left in her home, and the stocking used to strangle Virginia all came from the same man. They then tried to use genetic genealogy to identify potential suspects, but the effort was unsuccessful. An unexpected phone call would soon change the course of the investigation, and on March 18, 2021, Plymouth County District Attorney Tim Cruz announced that Virginia's case had finally been solved. He identified the person whose DNA was found at the scene, and who his office believed to be Virginia's killer as Jesse Aylward. Aylward had been 22 years old at the time of Virginia's murder and had a criminal record that detailed crimes committed between the mid-1980s and mid-1990s. Authorities did not release details of this record beyond stating that it included what they described as some assaultive behavior. Aylward had come to investigators' attention on February 4, 2020, when one of his friends, whose identity is being withheld, called them. The informant told them that in early 2019, Aylward had admitted to killing a woman in Pembroke many years earlier. They had called in this information on that particular day because Aylward had died the day before. The informant was interviewed and is not facing any charges related to the case. Because Aylward had just died when investigators learned of his confession, his body was still at Brockton Hospital, where he had passed away, and they were able to obtain a DNA sample from it. His DNA was ultimately found to be a match to the DNA found on the various items from the crime scene. Between the statement from the witness and the DNA evidence, District Attorney Cruz is confident that Aylward was responsible for Virginia's death, even though Aylward is not alive to face charges in court. While Virginia's family is grateful to finally have answers in her case, they do wish that Aylward had been held responsible for her murder. His death also prevents them from trying to get him to reveal the motive for the crime. They are hoping that Aylward, being publicly identified, will encourage people who knew him to re-examine their memories and report any information they may have about Aylward or why he committed such a seemingly senseless and brutal crime. Somebody will remember, I believe. Virginia's nephew, Richard Hannan, said at the district attorney's press conference, "Somebody will be brave enough to come forward." Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.